Welcome to episode 6 of Project Stresa, a timeline which starts at the point of divergence of Austria being admitted into Germany in 1919. The Saxon allies have finally initiated their counterattack on the Latin Axis. Through subterfuge and combat, the Fourth French Republic had fallen into civil war between three factions: those loyal to Marcel Déat's neo-socialist government, those loyal to Diderot's government in Vichy, and the Social Democrats of Free France, aligned with the Saxon allies. The Pannonian Basin was blitzed by Germans from the north, linking up with the Yugoslavian resistance members in Serbia before liberating more of their land in the north. The Soviets had attempted to circumvent the Allied fortifications of the Dnieper through a Baltic invasion, but were not able to make a breakthrough. Now, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Saxon allies, the United States of America had joined the fight. But before we explore what that means, we need to investigate exactly what the Americans' reaction was to the surprise attack, and why it was done in the first place. There is no doubt that in our history, Pearl Harbor changed everything. This is true for this timeline as well, if not more so. The previously neutral nation who had had enough of war had become rapidly pro-war essentially overnight. Even without the knowledge that the American public would react this way, the decision of Japan to bomb Pearl Harbor seems incredibly foolish. Why didn't they just let the giant sleep? Once you understand the logic of the decision, it makes a lot more sense. The USA had been supporting the Kuomintang since the First Revolution, and it had not stopped after the Second Sino-Japanese War, supplying arms to the Chinese via trade between their intermediary, the Philippines. Fearing the US joining the war to protect Chinese sovereignty, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in hopes to eliminate the United States Pacific Navy before the war had begun. Soon after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, they began an invasion of the Philippines, using the element of surprise in hopes to cut off the Americans from their largest Pacific naval base. They had managed to quickly secure the island. The Field Marshal of the Philippines, Douglas MacArthur, had evacuated, saying his famous quote, "I shall return." In response to this, the United States Congress had immediately declared war on the Japanese, upon request by Roosevelt. However, he did not request that Congress attack Britain. Why? In our history and in this alternate timeline, Roosevelt was extremely amicable to the Allies. In this timeline, the British-Japanese alliance would concern Roosevelt, but he could tolerate their collaboration as the Saxon allies fought the dictatorships of Europe as one. However, the British-Japanese alliance would not stop the Americans from their support of the Republic of China. In their eyes, China under Chiang Kai-shek was a young nation who had dreams of becoming a democracy. Due to the USA not bending on their desire to support China, the Pacific War was unavoidable. Roosevelt had hoped to keep the Americans out of the European War, as if the Americans were to support the Latin Axis unconditionally, they'd be actively participating in Europe's fall to communist and fascist dictatorships. So Roosevelt would not request Congress to declare war on the British or the Germans. The refusal for Roosevelt to declare on the Saxon allies caused the American public to be outraged. America was founded on an anti-British revolt, and now we're letting them get away with supporting the Japanese? And while the Germans were democratic, the resentment that the average American had felt for the Hun during World War I was still haunting the American zeitgeist. Notable intellectuals like Carroll Quigley had the conspiracy theory that many elites in American society were attempting to sell their nation back to the British. While this is vehemently false in both our history and this alternate timeline, this theory would spread like wildfire among the American populace. American industrialists sympathetic to the ideals of corporatism as espoused by the dictators of the Latin Axis would support America's entry into the European War, wishing to emulate their government. MacArthur had finally reached America, and as he did, he told the American media that he had seen Japanese aircraft arriving from the south of the island. He asserted that this was due to the British allowing Japanese aircraft to station themselves in the colony of North Borneo. It was due to the southern attack that the Philippines had been lost so quickly, and he demanded that the Americans declare war on the British immediately. This news, whether it was true or not, caused the already tumultuous political situation to become unsalvageable for the Democratic Party. With the Senate and House elections due in 1942, and the public yearning for war against the Saxon allies, Roosevelt would be impeached, and his vice president Henry A. Wallace would succeed him. Conditional to his ascension to presidency, the Democratic Party ordered Henry A. Wallace to declare war on the Saxon allies. In response to this war, the Canadian government executed Defense Plan 1, establishing a guerrilla movement and deterring as much aggression as possible, prior to evacuating their armed forces away from the continent. The National Guard bordering the state regions were quickly deployed and aided in the Federal Army's invasion. The Canadians stood no chance as they were quickly occupied. But why did the British withdraw? The simple reason is that Canada is not a suitable staging ground for an invasion of the States, no matter how much Hearts of Iron 4 you've played. The British have eliminated a front line that their land forces would need to contest with, and allow for them to re-invade as liberators when their existential threats were dealt with. Operation Margaret is almost complete. The Saxon allies only need to eliminate the fascist Romanian, Bulgarian, and Albanian occupations. Macedonia was reclaimed for the Yugoslavians. The fascist militias of Romania were expelled. The Bulgarian capital had been seized. It was only a matter of time before Albania was captured, and the forces of the Latin Axis were utterly destroyed. While the Italians were able to withdraw a significant portion of their troops from Albania, the majority of them would become prisoners of war, as the Saxon allies finally secured the Balkans. But now that they had, what were they going to do with the land that they had occupied? Albania would be occupied partially by the Yugoslavians and Greeks, both with desires to partition Albania between themselves. Germany would maintain an occupation of Hungary as they attempted to create a democratic government. Bulgaria would be occupied by several of its neighbors. Turkey was eager to annex the Islamic majority regions into their country, but were under threat of the Yugoslavians, as in their pan-Slavic fervor, they wished to integrate the Bulgarians into their state. Out of concerns for the stability of the region during this occupational period, these motions were denied. While the Saxon allies had managed to secure one of the most contentious fronts in Europe in lightning speed, they had floundered regarding the best way for them to proceed with the occupation. This only helped increase the paramilitary activity in the region, with communist paramilitary organizations filling the power vacuum that the Saxon allies had left behind on their warpath. And while the Saxon allies had managed to defeat Operation Uranus, the threat of a Soviet push eventually succeeding lied heavily on the shoulders of soldiers and world leaders alike. The Saxon allies would divert troops that they had committed to Margaret back to their front lines of the Soviet Union, as they began plotting new invasions and potential countermeasures to a Soviet advance. However, they couldn't have possibly predicted what the Soviets were plotting. The failure of Operation Uranus weighed heavily on Stalin's mind. The purges that he had performed to rid the Union of traitors had led to his greatest minds being replaced by incompetent fools. Due to Operation Charles' meticulous planning, and with the narrative of a communist being the assassin of Pétain being accepted by the Latin Axis, the Latin Axis had begun immediately accusing the Soviet Union of attempting to undermine the alliance. In order to preserve their alliance, Stalin had denounced the neo-socialist faction in France and recognized the Vichy government as the true government of France. A very controversial move, but it was necessary. Even if it had meant that their influence had completely dissipated in France, their plans still remained the same. Let the liberals and fascists kill each other. The world revolution would come to judge them soon enough. He would make sure of that. After the Americans had joined the war, they had wasted no time in their collaboration with their new allies, quickly hypothesizing their plan of attack. The main advantage that the British and Japanese had was their access to resources in Asia. Their dominance over the region and their uncontested naval strength led to the British and Japanese being able to quickly transport troops, resources, and other goods to each other with ease. The only threat that the Saxon allies had to their naval dominance in the region was the isolated colony of Italian East Africa. But recently, the British were able to occupy the colony, leaving the Latin Axis with no naval bases in the region. While victory would certainly be achieved by gaining dominance over the Atlantic, the potential failure of the American Navy could lead to their capability of executing an invasion to fail. In order to secure the ability for the Americans to naval invade the British Isles, they had to destroy the British economy. The Americans and Soviets had created a plan to best facilitate a British economic collapse. The Soviets would blitz southwards, capitulating the Central Asian states and sweep into India, where they would trigger a revolution. The Americans would support this endeavor by dominating the Mediterranean Sea. This would then allow the Americans to seize the Suez Canal, allowing them to move their navy through the canal and bring it into the Indian Ocean, contesting the Saxon Allied naval dominance and supporting the revolutionary effort. With the American entry into the Latin Axis, the victory that the Saxon allies had been so close to achieving was no longer within their grasp. While they had managed to secure the Balkans completely, their advance into Italy and France were stalling, as American weaponry began reaching the soldiers of the Latin Axis. With the American army soon landing in Europe, the Saxon allies were anticipating for the main battles of the war to occur in Western Europe. But that assumption was exactly what the Latin Axis were hoping to exploit. The Soviets had played their hand, as they executed large-scale offensives originating from the Caucasus and Central Asia. This unexpected concentration of forces caught the regional armies off guard, as the Red Army began their blitz towards the crown jewel of the British Empire. Will the Saxon allies react in time to this unexpected thrust? Would they attempt a counterattack, or try desperately defending? How will they respond to American presence in the Atlantic? And what the heck is the USA going to do with Canada? All these questions and more will be answered in episode 7 of Project Stresa. Hi, I just wanted to give a quick channel update. I recently passed 100 subscribers. I'm very amazed with how quickly this has happened. I really wanted to thank everybody for your support. It really means the world to me. I really love seeing all your comments every day. It really helps me keep motivated and make better videos. I wanted to thank Tommy K for featuring me on his stream the other day. I think that really helped the algorithm promote my videos, and I'm really glad that it's reached so many of you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing this channel grow. I'm really glad I can share my passion with you all. And yeah, I'll see you in episode 7.